Okay. All right. Why don't we get started and people will join us. So, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And for our speaker series, we're kind of winding down the year, but our last speakers are going to be the best ones we've had all year. So it's very exciting. And our speaker tonight is, many of you do know, Paul Greenberg. Paul, actually, I have the copies of his 3 articles here. He's the only person who had 2 talks, but 3 articles. And I did notice that the first one was 2015. And I do remember Paul was in the first year that we had the series and spoke about management in the media age, lessons for radiology from the world of TV and music. And then was back in 2018, understanding the rapidly changing business landscape, a primer for medical personnel and managing and motivating your team. And, Paul spoke with us, I remember then from the first time, about how he hires, how he manages people, and just the challenge and how we can learn that in medicine. Paul's been at a number of different companies. He's been CEO 3 times. He's been at big companies like A&E, where he was senior vice president. He was with Barry Diller for a while, Comedy Central, and now he's the CEO and COO of Meet Cute, which he'll speak about a little bit later. I think amongst the many things Paul has been able to do is really take challenging jobs and try to create unique opportunities. At every place he's been, when he would take over, I could read from his LinkedIn thing, but I remember, that he made like the top shows on Facebook and Snapchat and build things up because he was able to really understand how things work. He was very good at dealing with and managing people and really leading people. And I think leadership is something we all talk about, but it's something that's always been a challenge for all of us. And particularly, that when you read the papers now, that is the most challenging of times. When you look at companies that succeed, you look at, I'll give a bias here, you look at NVIDIA, name you think about it's Jensen Huang. You look at companies that lead, whether it's Tim Cook or we're talking about Ed Catmull, leadership and success starts at the top. And how do you manage people and how do you manage challenges? I think that's the biggest thing, because even in the best of companies, things will never always go well, whether it's the things that you expect to go wrong, or it's the things that just like COVID, nobody could expect to ever happen. So I think Paul tonight is going to speak about a number of those things. His title is Business Management and Mental Health, and how you look at the 2 of them. And Paul, it's great to have you here.
Well, thank you, Elliot. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here. And thank you everybody who took the time to join today. I should note that I'm calling from New York City, so please excuse any background noise. We just call it ambiance here. So as you know, we are in the middle of a mental health crisis. The National Institutes of Health estimates that at least 1 in 5 adults lives with a mental health issue. And obviously, that number does not take into account the people around them who were affected by the issue in a secondhand way. The pandemic also exacerbated existing mental health problems while creating new ones, as Elliot alluded to. The National Alliance for Mental Health reported that more than 60% of adults experienced anxiety, depression, or both related to COVID. Similarly, according to the CDC, the percentage of adults in the US reporting symptoms of anxiety or depression increased from 11% in 2019 to 42% in 2021. The pandemic also highlighted the significant disparities in access to mental health care, particularly for marginalized communities. Now, of course, this is going to affect people in the workplace. In the same way that people deal with physical ailments, mental health issues at work need to be addressed and dealt with in an appropriate, empathetic way. Today, I'm going to talk about what I've learned about managing people when mental health problems are so widespread, both for the people I was leading as well as for myself. I'll give some background on my own struggles and then share some thoughts on how managers can provide a welcoming, nurturing atmosphere to those who are in need. Elliot was kind enough to share some of my work bio with you, and overall, I've been very fortunate to have had a wide-ranging array of jobs and leadership roles in my career. But I've also been dealing with mental health issues for most of my life. When I was 13, I tried to take my own life by hanging myself in my school's locker room. The pipe around which I tied my necktie broke under my own weight when I jumped off the windowsill to the floor. Scared and alone, I ran out of the locker room and tried to sort out my muddled thoughts. So after that incident, I started seeing a psychiatrist, which helped to some extent, but my depression and suicidal urges remained, often growing stronger for long periods of time and never waning much. Throughout all of this, very few people outside of my immediate family and maybe one or two close friends knew that I was depressed. I pushed hard through the almost constant pain, and I was and still am fortunate to have a remarkably wonderful family, great friends, and a very successful career. I've worked nearly 3 decades of 10-hour days, during which none of my colleagues knew that I was struggling. Sometimes the work was a solace, other times it was simply a massive burden that I had to endure. Although fighting the depression could grow time-consuming with doctor's appointments and periods of time that I wasn't myself, I told almost no one at work because I was concerned about the stigma. Would people think I was weak? If I were in the running for a new job, would the people making the hire discover my health issue and judge me unfit or unreliable? Would my friends abandon me? I always understood that my depression and suicidal urges are an illness, and I didn't stop looking for a treatment that could help. For me, perseverance was critical. More than 3 decades after my descent into that dark world, I was fortunate enough to meet a triumvirate of incredible doctors who were finally able to help me. In 2013, they convinced me to undergo ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, previously known as electroshock therapy. And frankly, I was scared to do it. I wasn't sure what side effects I'd suffer. Short-term memory loss, bad headaches, and nausea are the most common, although they generally go away after the treatment ends. I didn't know if it would affect my work or if I could even go into the office while the bulk of the treatment was going on, approximately 3 to 6 weeks. I didn't know if it would hurt. Fortunately, in the last few decades, ECT has become much easier to undergo as patients are given a general anesthetic and a muscle relaxant, and techniques have vastly improved. It's nothing at all like the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest version, if you remember that. And lo and behold, it actually worked. After a month or so of having 3 treatments per week, early in the morning, so I was able to go straight to work with no one the wiser, and very fortunately suffering very few side effects, I suddenly felt better. I was in the playground with my kids one Sunday, and almost magically, I felt the absence of the albatross that had hung around my neck for so many years. My mind felt clearer. I had no more suicidal impulses. I actually felt happy. I hadn't experienced a feeling like that in my adult life, and it suddenly opened up all the remarkable possibilities that life holds. Without changing my inner self, I felt like a new person. ECT was, for me, a medical miracle. After about 6 years, though, the antidepressant effects of the ECT wore off, and my doctor recommended a new treatment, ketamine. Ketamine was invented in 1962 as an anesthetic and has also been used as a club drug since the 1980s. But then in 2000, a couple of scientists at Yale had great success with it for treating depression. So I now get ketamine intravenously. It's a 40-minute infusion, and during it, I feel loopy and a little spacey for 25 minutes, and then I come out of it. While it is fast acting on the depression, the effects don't last forever. I go every few weeks for a new infusion, and it's been a tremendous help. Winston Churchill called his depression his black dog, a comparison that's always stuck with me because depression does feel to me like an outside force that can't be reasoned with and that attacks seemingly whimsically. It bares its teeth when it feels like it, and there's no way to control it. Other analogies are just as apt: Sylvia Plath's bell jar, Franz Kafka's mice, etc. All describe being in the throes of a terrifying, relentless power. I was very lucky that I had depression that didn't incapacitate me. Getting up every day and going to work was brutal sometimes, but there was some ability I had to parcel out the work that needed to happen and compartmentalize the issues of how I felt and what I needed to get done. Often it was just a slog working hard to get through it. But I would go through my day and I would get to work and focus as hard as I could on the people around me, trying to feel needed and trying to understand and be as empathetic as possible to what I could do for them and how I could help them. Somehow that made it a little easier to get through the day, to feel like I was part of something bigger. I had a mission that connected me to other human beings, and I had a responsibility to those people. It's important to note that not everyone experiences the symptoms of mental health in the same way. While sometimes people are able to push through and mask their symptoms, that's not the case for everyone. This is a disease, and if you don't have mental illness, understanding what it feels like can be difficult. It's not the same as feeling sad. You can't just snap yourself out of it, despite some people's admonishments to simply cheer up. It can be crippling and can truly affect everything you try to accomplish on a daily basis. I know that lots of people feel this way every day, and they're to be commended for having the wherewithal to push through the pain and get through their daily lives. So how do you manage through this as a leader? Well, first, let me take a step back and define the general leadership principles that I stick by. For me, the most important lesson that I've learned is only do what only you can do. So in that vein, there are 5 basic ways that managers should spend their time doing only what they can do. Number 1, setting strategy. Make sure that I create a coherent strategy for the business. I have to do this in conjunction with other team members, of course. Doing this in a vacuum is perilous. Number 2, communication. Making sure that this strategy is communicated clearly to everyone on my management team and throughout the entire organization. Everybody needs to be on the same page about what we have to do. Number 3 is hiring, putting the right people in place. Number 4 is helping, removing any obstacles from the team's way so that they can succeed at doing the things at which they excel. And number 5 is financing, making sure we have enough capital to achieve our goals and getting that funding in place if we don't. Of those 5, the communication and helping aspects are critical when it comes to mental health issues. That's where managers can really make an impact on those who are struggling. Leading with empathy is also required. Putting yourself in the shoes of those who are suffering helps you understand how hard it can be for people to do their jobs. Now, to be clear, addressing mental health issues in the workplace isn't just the right thing to do, it's good for business. The more supportive you are as an employer, the greater the likelihood that giving your employee time and help now can make things go better for you later. As with any disease, these symptoms get worse as they go untreated. So dealing with it head on as soon as possible will help make sure you don't lose good employees who might ultimately have to quit because of what they're facing. So here are some guidelines for how to manage people when mental health issues are cropping up everywhere. First, as I've said, encourage open communication. Creating a safe and supportive environment that encourages employees to discuss their mental health concerns with their supervisors or HR can help identify and address issues early on. Now, a big part of this is destigmatizing mental health issues. And you begin to destigmatize it by talking about it as if it were normal, which it should be. It should be as natural as saying, I have to take my car in for a tune-up. Saying, I can't be here for an hour or so since I have my therapy appointment this afternoon will help people start to use it as the vernacular of normal conversation. If you say it as casually as that, people might look at you funny for a second, but then they tend to adjust. To that point, because of my worries about what people would think, I believe my getting ECT was detrimentally delayed. And just because I was able to push through didn't mean I wasn't affected by stigma. Had I felt comfortable going to my employer earlier, I would have saved myself immense additional and unnecessary suffering. It is critical that we give people safe spaces to talk about what's affecting them. So as a manager, I try to create that culture of acceptance by being open about these issues for myself. Now, sometimes when people started to ask me about it, they felt like they were intruding. But if I was able to say, I want to talk about it, yes, I was in ketamine, and this is what it was like, and this is what happened, it really made a difference. I wasn't trying to, as they say, trauma dump, and I didn't want to share my pain unnecessarily, but I really think it helped people understand that this is something that affects a lot of different people and can be normal. And even if you don't suffer from mental health issues yourself, by being proactive and getting ahead of the conversations, you can make sure employees can come to you and feel less ashamed about talking about their own challenges. Once they do come to you, it's important to listen carefully, not to overpromise about what you can do, and not to make it about you. You should also bring HR into the conversation as soon as possible to make sure that everybody's being treated fairly and that you're abiding by any applicable laws. At the end of the day, as I've said, it's a business. The manager wants that person to be as productive as possible. Creating an environment where somebody can come and talk to them and say, I'm not doing so well today, will go a long way. If you have a meeting and somebody is miserably depressed, she's not really going to be able to contribute much to that meeting. So give her the space to come to you and say, I'm feeling horrible today. I'm just not there for whatever reason, or I need to go and have this treatment, in the same way she would about a physical illness. Now, you don't want to make her feel like she has to spill her guts, but you want to let her be able to say, I'm just not able to be fully present today. It's good to know as a manager which of your team members is able to be more productive on certain days and who can contribute and who can't. So other things that can help are offering mental health benefits, providing access to mental health services such as counseling, therapy, or support groups can help employees manage their mental health concerns. As a matter of fact, there are lots of examples of large companies doing this. Microsoft, for example, offers its employees a comprehensive wellness program that includes access to mental health counseling, resources for managing stress, and a confidential employee assistance program. They also provide training for managers to identify and address mental health issues in the workplace. Google has a program called Search Inside Yourself, which includes emotional intelligence and mindfulness training. They also offer mental health benefits such as therapy, counseling, and meditation programs. Starbucks provides mental health benefits to all its employees, including access to counseling, therapy, and virtual resources. The company's also launched initiatives called Mental Health Matters to raise awareness and reduce the stigma surrounding mental health in the workplace. Salesforce offers its employees mental health resources and benefits, such as access to counseling, therapy, and meditation programs. They have a program called Mindfulness Without Borders, which offers mindfulness training to employees. And American Express offers mental health benefits, such as access to counseling, therapy, and support groups. The company's also launched a program called Healthy Minds, which provides employees with resources and tools for managing stress and promoting well-being. All of these companies understand that healthy employees have higher morale and are simply more productive. What else can you do? Well, accommodate people's needs. Making reasonable accommodations, such as flexible work schedules or modified job responsibilities, can help employees manage their mental health while maintaining their roles. Having said that, it's important for managers to know the difference between accommodations, which are formal reactive exceptions to existing policies for a specific employee after a disclosure, and adaptations, which are proactive adjustments you can make for everyone that are within the company's policies, such as flexible hours or working remotely. And as I've said, if you need to make accommodations for an employee, it's critical to involve HR to make sure you're implementing these policies appropriately. Also, some of the changes made to working hours or workload might impact other people on your team, and you'll have to figure out what to tell employees who ask why this person is coming in late or experiencing different treatment. Keep your answers to those questions straightforward and simple. For example, you might just say, it's an accommodation, or we worked out different hours. Talk with that employee about how they would prefer you address any concerns that come up from their colleagues. Now, once you give one employee an accommodation, will other employees ask for the same? Potentially, and if so, it's important to work with them on a case-by-case basis to make sure they're being treated fairly and they're given the ability to do their job at maximum performance. It's also important to do things like promoting work-life balance. Encourage your employees to take time off and disconnect from work. Make sure they feel comfortable taking time for vacation or personal reasons without feeling guilty or facing negative consequences. Offer flexible work hours or remote work options to allow your employees to better balance their work and personal lives. Encourage your employees to set boundaries between their work and personal lives. Have them turn off work email notifications and avoid working during non-work hours. Encourage your employees to exercise, which not only promotes physical health, but also mental well-being. For example, offering gym memberships to your team can be an extremely helpful thing to do. And most importantly, as a manager, lead by example by promoting a healthy work-life balance for yourself. Encourage your employees to take care of themselves and prioritize their well-being. Now, obviously, this is all easier said than done, but it is critical. And as we're starting to go through all of these things and trying to figure out how to treat employees appropriately, these are some important things to consider. And I would say the last thing is be nice. Fostering a positive work environment that promotes employee well-being and prioritizes work-life balance can improve employee morale, motivation, and mental health. Overall, the key is to be empathetic and realize that mental health issues affect far more people than we know, both firsthand and otherwise. And these issues don't discriminate. They can affect anyone. It's time to bring all of this into the light and allow those who need treatment for it to get it unburdened by prejudice. Just because it isn't visible doesn't mean it isn't painful. It's no different from a heart, muscle, or bone condition. It needs to be treated as a medical illness and can't be wished away. I said this to my doctor when he said, get ECT. He said, you may have to skip work for a month. And I said, that's ridiculous. I can't. What am I going to tell them? And he said to me, well, let me ask you a question. If you had to get a stent put in because you were having a heart attack, would you stop going to work and go to the hospital? And I said, of course. And he said, this is the same thing. This is a medical illness. It just happens to be in your brain as opposed to another part of your body. Of course, there are some employers who don't prioritize health issues at all, mental or physical, which, as I've said, in my opinion, is a mistake. People feel afraid or unable to take time off to support themselves and get healthy because they fear retribution, judgment, or simply guilt and shame. So this can be an opportunity for employers to rethink their stance on illness in general. Are people getting time off to deal with the health issues that face them? If not, how is that impacting morale and productivity, and therefore the bottom line? In general, if you're suffering from mental illness, please don't give up. Too many people do, partly because that's what depression, anxiety, and other mental health afflictions do to you. They make you feel hopeless in addition to having to deal with the underlying condition itself. There is hope and help. You have to keep fighting as best you can. I'd like to leave you with a passage from the author M. Roy in her book, The First Step, where she says, people assume you aren't sick unless they see the sickness on your skin, like scars forming a map of all the ways you're hurting. My heart is a prison of have you trieds. Have you tried exercising? Have you tried eating better? Have you tried not being sad, not being sick? Have you tried being more like me? Have you tried shutting up? Yes, I have tried. Yes, I am still trying. And yes, I am still sick. Sometimes monsters are invisible, and sometimes demons attack you from the inside. Just because you cannot see the claws and the teeth does not mean they're not ripping through me. Pain does not need to be seen to be felt. So hopefully telling my story can help destigmatize these issues a little more. And please let me know if I can be helpful personally. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, that was wonderful, Paul. So if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. But let me start on, when you mentioned leadership, then you mentioned mental health. The one word that was in both places was communication.
Yep.
And, it's easier said than done. How do you teach that? I mean, I'm not sure in business school, do they teach communication? Do they teach empathy? I think that, the company, particularly now, I think that as we come out of COVID, I think people were really stressed out during COVID, but during a crisis, you can act, you can keep going. But now with COVID, hopefully, knock wood, gone, now I notice people are first really feeling stressed out about it, how much they've given up, how much has changed, how much has happened. How do you deal with the communication?
Well, as I said, I think the most important thing is to lead by example. And so if you're suffering from mental health issues, then being able to say that and to tell people that you have to go to therapy for an hour, I'll be back, or I just have to check out right now for a few minutes. I need to go do this thing and I need to meditate for 5 minutes. Leading by example is really critical. And if you're not suffering from mental health issues, it's giving people that space to talk about it and trying to be empathetic. Because as I've said, employees who are suffering from any sort of illness, whether it's physical or mental, are not going to contribute to the company in the best way possible. And it's going to affect their work. It's going to affect everybody else's work and the team's work. And then it's going to affect the bottom line. And it's going to affect your clients. It's going to affect everybody, anybody that you're working with, your patients. If you're not fully there, it's really, really hard to be productive. And so, I think that the communication starts at the top, as always. And so if the boss isn't being communicative, it's going to be impossible for the employees to do so. And then they're going to try to talk amongst themselves. And some people will be worried, and people will worry about the stigma, and people will worry that they're going to get judged. And so it's got to come from leadership, without question.
But does, okay, the CEO of a company answers, I guess, the shareholders, but more importantly, probably answers to the board of directors, right? Because at the end of the day, they can, so we take Disney, for example. Okay, Bob Iger is back after a number of years. And if you look at the person he replaced, who he theoretically chose, from what I read, most of the problem was communication or a lack of vision or any of the above. I mean, how do you, if you have management, does management really push on to leaders that they need to be communicating, that they need to be compassionate, or it's just, hey, let's look at the P&L and not really worry about it?
I think it depends on the company, and it depends on the culture. And I think as the CEO, it's up to you to set the culture. And so again, as a leader, you have to be the one to lead by example and communicate as much as possible. If you're not communicating, then people really don't know how they fit into the larger picture. It's like that famous story at NASA when the first rocket the first Apollo mission went to the moon. Somebody asked the janitor, what's your job here? And he said, my job is to put a man on the moon. And so everybody has that same shared mission. But the only reason that he knew about that was because it had been communicated throughout the ranks, communicated very clearly by everybody or by the CEO, by the leadership team, and made sure that everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing.
So let me ask a personal and not personal question at the same time. You mentioned about the challenges people have being honest, particularly when they have illness of any type, right? People are afraid that it makes them look weak, or perhaps it's going to slow down their movement up the corporate ladder and all sorts of things. How do you, as a leader, how do you communicate to your employees that, listen, we're here for you without, it's easy to say, right, and no one believes it, but how do you really come across to be able to tell people that, we hope everything is great, but we're here in good and we're here in bad? How do you do that?
Just like you said, you have to say it, and then you have to walk the walk. So, prioritizing mental health days for yourself if necessary, prioritizing exercise, prioritizing work-life balance. It's really show, don't tell to some extent, because if you are just saying it and not doing it, people are going to see right through that, and they're going to feel afraid, and they're going to feel like, first of all, you're not being truthful with me in general. And so therefore, why should I trust you? But if you say it and then you follow through on it yourself, people are going to start to trust you more. So I really do think that it's leading by example and showing people that, whatever behavior you want them to exhibit, you're exhibiting it as well, and doing it very clearly and very publicly for them to see.
All right. Well, guys, everyone have a great, our pleasure. Sue and Sandy, great seeing you, and everybody else. Have a great evening and pleasant tomorrow. Good night, everybody.